This is Profit from the Inside with Joel Block. Strategies to give your business the inside track. And now, here's your host, Joel Block.
How many times have you wished you could walk into a casino, sit down at a blackjack table, and start taking chips off the table because you're smarter than the casino? Well, it doesn't happen for everybody, but there are a few people that know how to do that. And those people tend to be professional card counters. And I happen to have one with us here right now. And this episode is the inside track on how to beat the dealer, take money off the table in Vegas, and how to make that happen. So with us now, a different name because there's a certain amount of anonymity that needs to go along with this. Michael, thank you. Welcome to the show.
You're very welcome. It's good to be here.
Well, thanks very much for joining us. So how long have you been playing cards?
I have been playing cards now for about 30 years. My first actual trip to Vegas as an adult, over the age of 21, was 1986-87 New Year's Eve.
Wow.
And yeah, so of course I didn't know what I was doing. Give
us a little. So wait a second. So we'll get to your backstory here in a minute.
Okay.
But
sure.
Have you actually gone into a casino and predictably? Not just like one time you got lucky, but where you go over and over again. I mean, are you over and over again able to take dollars off the table?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I have, unfortunately, I've visited several casinos, one too many times over the years. And because I was there's the skill factor, of course, but there's always that little bit of, that superstitious luck factor. And some casinos you just seem to run a little bit better in than other casinos. Again, that's all superstition and luck, but by and large, there are a few of them, and I spent too much time in a few of them, and eventually I got the tap on the shoulder, which we can get into shortly. But
for people that don't know what that means, the tap on the shoulder is their polite way of telling you get your butt out of the casino and don't ever come back.
Exactly. It's called a barring, and there's
getting barred.
Yeah. There's a soft bar and a hard bar, and we can get into that shortly. But yeah, I've been soft barred before several times actually. So yeah,
well,
not a good feeling.
Doesn't sound fun. So, well, listen.
No.
So you've been playing for a long time.
Yes.
I mean, is this something is it something like a knack? You just had a knack for it, or where did this come from?
Yeah. So, like I said, I went to Vegas the New Year's Eve of 1986-87, and I actually stayed and played, if you can believe it or not, at the Circus at that time. Didn't know one casino from another. Thought that was kind of fun with all the trapeze artists and all the circus clowns and everything. And lo and behold, at the end of the weekend, I won $350 playing blackjack. Now, mind you, at the time, 1980, 86, 87, I was about 26 years old, $350, 30 plus years ago. It was a decent little hit of money I took out of the casino there, and I was like, wow, this is great. And I went back 6 months later, literally, and playing blackjack. And again, not really knowing what I was doing, I won an additional $150. So between the two trips, I won $500 within 6 months, and I was absolutely hooked. And that's all it took. Couple of wins very early on in my career, got hooked. The rest is history.
Well, how did you learn how to play blackjack? Everybody knows the rules of the game, but
right.
What do you know how to do as a counter that the rest of us do not know how to do?
Okay. So first of all, I got hooked. back in the mid to late 80s, as I told you, and I started playing and didn't really know, a double down from a split and a this to that. And I played horribly, and I started losing. Obviously, I got lucky. Like I said, the first couple of times, got hooked, and then I just started losing and losing consistently. And I said to myself right then and there, in my mid to late 20s, I love this game. If I want to keep playing, I have to educate myself, because I did know enough. I knew enough at the time that the game was mathematically beatable. I did know that. And I said, if I'm going to continue to play this game, I have to be able to beat it and make money at it and be profitable. There's no way I'm going to continue playing this game and handing money to these casinos. So what I did is I got out some books. I went to the library, I went to the bookstores, whatever, maybe a little bit online. I don't know if it was started then, but I think my first book that I got was the famous book by Edward Thorp, who's a mathematics professor from MIT and then eventually UCLA. Anyhow, he wrote the best-selling blackjack book called Beat the Dealer. And that was one of the first books I read. And I really got sucked into it then, and I was like a sponge, and I just kept reading and reading. And then I got some more books, and I educated myself, got really good, and started practicing literally at home on the kitchen table. And one thing led to another. I finally brought my blackjack IQ to the casinos. Of course, it took a little getting used to in a live casino, because it's a lot different in a real live casino than it is on your kitchen table at home. Trust me, big difference. But eventually I got used to, the lights and the noises and the dealers and the pit bosses and the cocktail waitresses and I started to produce. I started to make money. I was becoming profitable. And you talk about a rush. It was unbelievable. It was amazing. And that's how, so really just educating myself by reading and practicing, and then of course, trial and error in the casino, and I took off from there.
All right. Well, listen, we talk about the inside track, and if we're going to give people the inside track, I need you to kind of, give us a little bit more detail. So,
sure.
What exactly did you learn how to do? What exactly were you practicing? So that people kind of have a sense about what it is. Listen, right. I know plenty enough about this game. I do know a little bit about what you're doing, but you're clearly at another level. But what exactly were you doing?
Okay, so what the way the casino game of 21, or better known as blackjack, is beaten is basically through the art of card counting. And card counting is basically this. It's not remembering, the queen of diamonds or the three of hearts or the seven of spades. It's got nothing to do with that. Card counting is basically a weighing and unweighing of high cards versus low cards that come out of the deck. And what you do is, in a nutshell, you provide a digit, either a +1, a -1, or a neutral figure to the cards that come out as the dealer is dealing. So, for example, when a 2 through 6 hits the table, that's considered a low card. And since that's coming out of the deck, since that's being removed from the deck, those cards 2 through 6 are given a +1. So let's say a 2 of spades and a 3 of hearts comes out. Your count right now automatically went to +2. Okay. Now the reciprocal to that is when the high cards come out, and the high cards are your 10, Jack, Queen, King, and Ace. When those cards come out of the deck and they hit the table, those are given a -1. Okay. And the reason we give +1 and -1 is because, simply put, when there are fewer small cards left in the remaining deck. Okay, so let's say you're playing, for our example here today, let's say we're playing at a single deck table, okay? And a bunch of small cards have come out. That means what's left in the deck are high cards, you know, tens, jack, queen, kings, and aces. That is good for the player. Okay. And the reason it's good for the player, there's several reasons, but here are a couple of the 2-3 main reasons. The reason that the high cards left in the deck are good for the player is because, number one, you're going to get more blackjacks. Now, it's true, the dealer will get also more blackjacks too, but the difference is that when you as a player get a blackjack, you get paid 3-2 or 1.5 times your bet. When the dealer gets a blackjack and you don't have a blackjack, they take your even money. Okay. So again, you're getting 1.5 times your bet. When you get the blackjack, the dealer only takes even money. So if you trade blackjacks all night long, you're going to be 50% ahead financially over the house. So there is number one major reason that why it's positive to have, you know, the high cards remaining in the deck. The second big reason is when you go to double down. You know, let's say there's a lot of 10s left in the deck and you just happen to get a 7 and a 4 for an 11. Well, obviously your chances are much better of you receiving a 10 and getting an unbeatable 21 versus the dealer, which is what you want. So that's another reason why that if the remaining deck has a lot of 10s left, it's good for you because you end up successfully making more of your double downs. And there are other reasons too.
Well, another big reason is that the dealer's forced to hit on 16.
Oh,
so,
yeah. That's,
you know, when the dealer has one of those really quick hands at the end, a 10 blows them up.
Right. Yeah, that's the other third major reason. And again, there's more, but the other major reason is that when there's a preponderance of 10s left in the deck, the dealer, as you know, most people know that the dealer has to hit the house rules. The dealer has to hit on a hard 12 through hard 16. They're more likely to bust, and that's what you want. You want a busting dealer. So that's another great reason why a higher level of 10s in the remaining deck are very advantageous for the player.
So the whole concept is really pretty simple. All you're doing is you're comparing the balance of 10s, and when you start a brand new deck, there are 12 high cards, which is
technically
10,
16.
Jack, right? Well, 16 all total, but you got 10, Jack, Queen, King, and Ace. So those 5 times 4 suits
is 20 actually.
20 of them.
20.
And then you got the low cards. So you got the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 20 of those. And
so that's 40.
And then you got those neutral, those 0 value cards, which are 7, 8, 9. So when you open a brand new deck, it's perfectly in balance, right?
Exactly. So the next feature that a card counter will use is what's called a count. They have to keep a count of the high and low cards, and the industry standard, I like to call it the industry standard, is what's known as the high-low count. The high-low count basically gives, like I said earlier, a -1 on 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace, and then a +1, 2 through 6. So as these cards are coming out, you're giving that count, that +1, +2, +3, -1, -2, and it's like I said, it's a weighing and unweighing of those integers, just a single integer, and that's how you know when to place a big bet when the count is high, +2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the reciprocal bet making a small or minimum table bet when the count is negative. So
obviously,
that's how,
the higher the count, the bigger the bet.
Generally, that's also true with most professional card counters. The higher the count, the bigger the bet. And usually where most pros start betting really big is when there's what's known as a true count, and I can get into that in a few minutes, but a true count of about +4 to 5, a true count of +4 or 5, that's where you really start to send the money in. Now, unfortunately, when you send the money in, it raises some eyebrows. And that's usually where you got to be careful as a professional card counter, because that's when you usually get the tap on the shoulder. And of course, I've been down that road. So you got to be careful, because that's what they look for. The casino looks for large varying bets, wagers. In other words, a perfect example would be, let's say I come up to a table that has a $25 minimum, okay, and the maximum is let's say, 5,000. Okay. So a card counter would come up and start betting 25, 20, 25, 25, 25. And then when the count gets really high midway through a deck or a shoe, all of a sudden the card counter will go to 500 just out of the blue. Now that's very unusual for a recreational gambler, a recreational blackjack player, but a professional knows when to bet big. So that's what they do. But like I said, the problem is that bet variance stands out to the casino. So you got to be careful on what we call bet spread. That's what's
so when we talk about the inside track. Part of the inside track is looking normal when you're not normal. I mean, clearly,
yeah, exactly.
You're trying to look like an average player when you're clearly not an average player. But you want to have somebody perceive you that way. I guess that's true in poker and all kinds of games of skill.
Right. In fact, some of the professionals that I've known of, and just seen in different media outlets, whatever. Some of these professionals will actually they'll wear wigs and fake noses. They'll go with all kinds of disguises. They'll come, or I've seen or heard of guys professional card counters that come in drunk, or they're believed to be drunk, and they gargle with a little bit of alcohol, and they bring over like what looks like a mixed drink, and they act all drunk and slobberish, and meanwhile behind that whole disguise is the most sharpest, incredible card counter, and they're doing their thing. Yeah, it's amazing what some of these professional card counters will do. So some of them really try and look so just typical, just high rolling gamblers, just out for a good time. But the reality is they're keeping a very accurate count, and they're going for the kill. So
that's pretty amazing that that they go to those lengths to make it work.
Absolutely.
Is there really? Tell me this: is there really that much money at stake? I mean, how much money can you make doing this?
Well, it depends, on your level. Obviously, if you're betting, and I'll throughout the interview I'll use color codes, but like red chip is $5 chips. So if you go to a table, with a stack of red chips, let's say you have $400 in red chips, and you start with $5 bet, and then you bump it to 25 or 50. Technically, what mathematically you're supposed to win is about 1% of your total action based on your average bet times the length of your betting session. Now, I know that was a little convoluted, but the reality is that betting red chip level, you might make 10, 15, $20 an hour if you're really good. So it really depends on the level, your bankroll, the level that you're betting at, and most importantly, what you can get away with in the casino. See, half the battle of a professional card counter is getting away with the guys, the whole card counting thing.
You're talking about the betting spread.
Well, that too, getting away with the betting spread, just getting away with the whole card counting, situation, because, card counting not only involves bet spreads, but it also involves some, what we call basic strategy departure plays, meaning every once in a while, you're going to depart from basic strategy. And basic strategy is really just the optimal way to play each and every hand of blackjack. Okay, no matter what you're dealt, and then the dealer's up card, you have to play that a specific, mathematically correct way. Okay, that's the foundation of blackjack and card counting. You have to play basic strategy a certain way.
And that basic strategy was developed by Thorpe in the early '60s, right? That's the guy you were talking about who wrote that book. There were actually 4 mathematicians that worked for the military, and believe it or not, they had some extra time on their hands. And this was in the late '50s, and they actually came out, believe it or not, on desktop calculators, which took them many months. It's a true story. Four mathematicians that worked for the military, and they came up with a very crude level of basic strategy. But it turned out their crude level of basic strategy was about 90% accurate. Thorpe in the early '60s, Professor Thorpe at MIT had access to a mainframe 704, I think it was, IBM computer. And over the course of about a year or two, he refined that basic strategy that he learned from these 4 military mathematicians. Anyhow, long story short, he's pretty much the godfather of basic strategy and card counting, and he refined it to just the perfect, optimal way to play each hand. And there's, I think if I remember correctly, it's about 550 total hands between your first 2 initial cards and the dealer's single up card, that face up card. There's 550 total hands. And okay,
of course,
let me try to just summarize this here. So you have to count the cards. You have to keep track of what cards have come out of the deck and the ratio of cards. But you also have to play each hand that you're dealt perfectly, and there's no room for error here. I mean, any errors your odds, I imagine.
There's very little room. In fact, even one error an hour can considerably knock your profits down. So it's essential you play very accurate basic strategy. But yeah, go on.
Okay, so there's two big things we just talked about so far. One is the count. 2 is the basic strategy. But you also mentioned, you just threw in another little thing in there. You talked about some departures from basic strategy. Now that sounds rather like an advanced maneuver.
It is. And in a nutshell, what it's called basic strategy departure plays. And I'll give you a couple of extreme examples just so your audience can get a grasp of this. But okay, so normally when, let's say you get 2 10s, or 2 value 10s, like you have a king and a queen. So you have a 20, right? Which is a great hand in blackjack. But the dealer's showing a 6 as his or her face-up card. And the count at this point is extremely high. It's a very high positive count. High meaning that a lot of little cards are gone, a lot of big cards are left. Exactly. Right. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And the math says at a specific count, you're actually supposed to split those 10s against the dealer's 6. You actually split those 10s. Okay. And mathematically, that's a very profitable play for a professional card counter. Okay. And that's not, that's something, if it was on TV, it would say at this point, don't try this at home, because that's an advanced maneuver, that you don't do. Right. That. Yeah. But I would imagine you were talking about what you can get away with. I mean, if I saw somebody splitting 10s, I would probably think they're an idiot. Yeah. Well, they're one of 2 people. The casinos know this. They're one of 2 people. They're either that idiot, gambler just throwing caution to the wind, out for a great time, just showing off to his buddies or whatever, or that person is a highly skilled blackjack card counter. And the problem is, it's not going to take the casino long to figure out which of the two you are. And that's the problem. Now, of course, that was an extreme example, splitting tens. That is a major red flag. But if played correctly, it's a very successful and profitable play for a highly skilled card counter. But again,
but wait a second. But if it gets you kicked out of a casino, then making money on one hand isn't worth the downside, is it?
It isn't. It isn't. Some of the most highly respectable blackjack card counters in our country and around the world actually would rather take longevity versus a few short profits in a casino. You'd rather, there's an old saying, it's better to shear a sheep for life than to skin it once. Yeah. So that's the thing. Now you could make a lot of money in that one day that you go crazy with some of these, radical departure plays, but your shelf life is not very long. Trust me on that. Trust me on that one. So, but but that was just an extreme example.
All right.
Okay.
So
there's other subtle.
I think we kind of have laid the land here. So you got to get a lot of skills. You got to get your counting skills. You got to get your card playing skills. If you get to the advanced level, you have maybe a couple of departures.
Right.
You talked about true count. You want to explain that real quick?
Yeah, sure. Let me explain true count real quick. Okay. So, as you're counting down a deck, and we'll stay with a single deck for now. Okay. So as you're counting down a deck, the count's going to go up and down, right? +2, 3, 4, -1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. But the running count doesn't really give you an accurate count based on how much of the remaining deck is still left. So let me just, if I can, let me give you a mathematical example here. So let's say you're counting cards at a single deck. It's a freshly shuffled pack, and the dealer starts to shuffle. And let's say 13 cards, we'll keep this simple. 13 cards have come out of the deck, okay? Well, there's 52 cards in a deck. 13 cards is 1/4 of a deck, or 25%. So, and let's just say, for example, this is just a hypothetical. Let's just say, for example, that your count is +3, okay? But you still have 3/4 of that deck to be dealt, all right? So even though your count is +3, because you have 3/4 of a deck still to go, you have to convert that running count into a true count. And you do that simply by a quick mathematical equation. And when it comes to a single deck, or a double deck or whatever, a quarter deck that has been dealt, generally, okay, so 25%. So your count would be +3 divided by 3/4 of a deck. So in this case, it's 0.7. So your count really mathematically is 2.1, 2.2. So you round off to 2. Again, I know that's a little bit of mental.
If I could just summarize what I think I hear you saying is that if you start with a fresh deck and you pull a 10 off the top, and now you got a -1 count.
Right.
-1 when you got the whole deck left to deal is a lot less information than if it's the last card in the stack when you have perfect information. So as you go through the deck, the value of knowing the count changes based on how many cards remain.
Right. It becomes truer. The count becomes truer the more cards.
More accurate. That's right.
It becomes more accurate or truer. So that's why in the industry we call it a true count. So the true count usually, not always, but usually is a little different than the running count. It's usually a little higher or a little lower depending on where you are. Yeah.
I was in Vegas recently, and one of the things that I noticed is they're using the shuffling machines. Now, they've always used these shuffling machines, to kind of shuffle the cards a little faster. But what they're doing is, instead of putting the discards into one of those like clear trays that you could see, they just throw them back into the machine. So they're constantly shuffling the cards. Can you play against that?
No. Stay away from those tables at all costs. Those are like you said, those are what are called continuous shuffle machines. And they deal out, a round or two of blackjack, and then they take they put those cards in the discard tray, and then after a couple of 3 rounds, they take the discard and they just stick it right back into that automatic shuffle machine, and it just keeps recycling. So you can, as a card counter, you can never ever get a true count, or even a running count for that matter. I mean, accurately, because they recycle the used cards, and they just put them right back into that machine.
You know what always surprised me about this? Vegas doesn't like to lose. I mean, I get that. In fact, those giant hotels, they were not built by winners. We all know that. They were built by losers, right? So Vegas likes to win. They don't like to lose. But the funny thing is, a guy like you who can beat the casino, I don't know how much money you take out of the casino, but what it does is it stimulates thousands and thousands of other people who do not practice as hard as you, who do not work as hard as you, to go there and say, hey, I read a book. I bought a little card. I know what the basic strategy is. I'm gonna bring $500 and see how it goes. It seems to me like, a little teeny loss to a guy like you has made blackjack the biggest game in all of Las Vegas. So why are they so worried about this?
Well, it has made the one of the biggest table games in Vegas, and kind of like what you just said, and I'll elaborate. What happens is that the general public hears that the game of blackjack in a casino can be beaten. Okay, they hear that and they know it. Okay, so they look at a basic strategy card, that they buy in the casino gift shop, and they look at it for 10 minutes, or they get a book on blackjack and they're reading it on the plane flight out to Vegas, and they think, within a half hour or an hour of just looking at a few pages in a book, or they can become, it doesn't work like that. Nothing in life, as you know, works like that. The blackjack card counters, professional counters, are trained assassins in the casino. They've put a ton of hours into their craft, and trust me on that, because I have, and I've seen guys that blow me away. They live and breathe by card counting. So it's just not that simple. And because of that fact, hordes of potential card counters have assaulted on the casinos in Vegas and everywhere else in this country and around the world, and they think they can beat the casinos, but in reality, they can't, because they haven't put the time and the energy and the effort in and the knowledge.
Let's go back. Let's go back to something else. There were 2 other things that you said that I want to remind everybody who's listening how important they are. Number one is, you said that the hourly rate that you earn is 1% of your action. So if you're playing with $5 and you bet, let's say, 60 hands an hour, that's 60 times $5 is $300 of total action. 1% is $3. And that's
right. But now,
what I've always heard. So that'd be about $3. If you're playing with $100 chips, number one, the dealers at a $100 table are much better dealers. They put their best dealers because they want the action to move faster at the better. Is that right? Is that true?
That's absolutely true. Correct.
So you might get 150 instead of 60 hands. You might get 100 hands in an hour because they're probably less busy tables and everything. So you get 100. That's 10,000, and you make 1%. That's $100 an hour. So if you're playing, and you can do the math after that. But the point is, you got to move a lot of money to make any money in this game. Number 2 is one little error might give back all the profit for the whole day.
True. It's not that devastating, making one error, but it's vital. It's essential that you you don't make any errors. I mean, you really got to know your craft. But yeah, you hit on a point there just a second ago about you've got to move a lot of money to make any decent money. That is true. But here's the good side of that. People don't realize, but if you're playing $100 a hand, and let's say your average bet is $200 a hand, and let's just round off. Let's say you're at the dealer's pretty fast and pretty accurate, and you're playing 100 hands an hour. So you're moving $20,000 an hour, right?
Yeah.
200. Yeah. So you're moving 20,000 an hour. And let's round again. Let's just say let's say you're there in Vegas for a whole weekend and you play 10 hours, you just moved 200,000. Believe it or not, people don't realize how much money is actually moving across the table. Now, it never feels like that because you're winning a few hands and then the dealer's winning a few hands and the money's going back and forth. But in reality, at a long weekend, now for me, I've moved, 500, 600, 700,000 across the table in a long weekend, literally. And it's mind-boggling for the public to hear that, but that's the reality. So getting back to our math, if I'm moving 600, 700, 800,000 across the table in a weekend, and let's say I have a decent weekend and the numbers play out, 1%, I'll make 6, 7, 8 grand that weekend. And are you kidding me? Tax-free? That's a great weekend. That's an excellent weekend, by the way.
Yeah. Well, listen, that's the thing. And people really don't realize, that the money's moving. The casino is very, very clear about this. They understand their business very, very well. They put their very best dealers at the highest value tables where they're moving the most money, because a counter makes 1% of their action, but a non-counter, a regular person, what do they lose? What's the house take for those people?
Yeah, great question. The house generally, now if you're playing perfect basic strategy, but you're not, I repeat, not card counting, you've brought the house edge down to about 0.5%. So you're losing at about 0.5% of your total action. 0.5%. That's again not counting playing perfect basic strategy. On the other hand, and this is where most, unfortunately, of the general public falls into, if you're not counting and you're not playing perfect basic strategy, and trust me, over the last 30 years, I've seen just some horrible, and I mean horrendous blackjack players at the table, and they're annihilating basic strategy, and these people literally are playing at anywhere from a 2 to maybe 4 to 5% disadvantage. So if they're moving those kind of big numbers, and hopefully they're not, but if they are, they're going to be losing thousands, mathematically speaking. Now, even these guys can get lucky once in a while, but in the long run, the law of probability dictates that these people are going to lose at anywhere from 2 to 5% if they're playing bad.
So that brings up another good question. You talked about luck and you talked about the long run. Mathematically, I've always heard that the long run is 400 hours.
Yeah. What, in a nutshell, what I've always heard was 500. So we're pretty close right there. I've always been told 500 or more hours is the long run. Now, speaking of 400 or 500 hours, real quick, that's a lot of hours. On a good weekend for me in Vegas, if I could put in, let's say I fly to Vegas on a Friday, after a half day of work or whatever, and then leave Sunday night. If I could put a good 20 hours in, that's a big, long, heavy duty weekend of blackjack and card counting. But you and I right now, we're talking 400 to 500 hours. That's a lot of weekends in Vegas.
Well, that's the reason that the casino always wins in the long run, is because they are there for the long run. Individual players, luck is what happens every single hand. In anything less than 400 hours, it's actually mathematically. I've heard somebody say that luck is actually standard deviation. It's whatever the abnormality is.
Right. That's exactly what standard deviation. And by the way, the standard deviation in blackjack is 1.1. And basically what that means is standard deviation is basically, if you can picture a bell curve, the mathematical bell curve, okay, one standard deviation means that based on your average bet and how long you're playing, you're going to win or lose within one standard deviation, which is about 67% of the time. You're going to lose or win or lose that range of money, okay? Two standard deviations goes out about 97, 98%, and three standard deviations is 99%. Meaning, so three standard deviations means that you're gonna win or lose a certain amount, a range of money. 99.9% of the time, you're gonna fall into that bell curve of either winning or losing money. That's what three standard deviations is. And that's
let's kind of bring this back to the business of gambling, because gambling, called gaming, is a business. And these people in Las Vegas, these corporations and organizations that run these facilities, they thoroughly understand the mathematics. They understand the long term. They understand the standard deviation. They know whatever the things are, they understand it, and they understand it a lot better than us. And that imbalance is really where consumers go wrong. One of the things that I always talk about is that when it comes to money, everything's rigged. Because when it comes to money, everything is absolutely rigged. Now, it's not illegal. In fact, in Las Vegas, they don't even call it a rig. They just call it the house advantage. We all know that there's a house advantage. So when you sit down at a blackjack table, if you play perfect basic strategy, you just said you have a tiny disadvantage, like 0.5%. But if you're a terrible player and you're not playing that little card that you can buy in the gift shop, then you could lose 2 to 4 points an hour based on your action, on your average bet, multiplied by the number of times it circulates on the table. That could be you could be moving a lot of money in an hour or two. So
absolutely,
which is why people lose so much money, because the house rules are disfavorable to them, and the house knows that in the long run that they're going to win, which is why it's funny that they're so superstitious in the short run, but they are.
Right.
So it's amazing how much there is to know about this game. That now, what about other games? Is it possible to beat craps the same way, or are other games different?
No. Most other games are what mathematicians call independent trials, meaning that a game of craps where, you roll 2 dice, you toss 2 dice, each roll of the dice is mathematically independent of the previous roll and the ensuing roll. So the house edge is basically fixed in the long run on games like craps and roulette and baccarat and so on and so forth. So those are independent trials. So you in the long run, you cannot mathematically beat those games. That, on the other hand,
what about these guys? There's a lot of these guys I've seen. They throw the dice in a certain way, and they have a certain advantage. Because is that real, or is that somebody?
No, it is real. It's called controlled dice throwing. And what these guys do is they practice. They actually they buy a real life size, authentic craps table, stick it in their home or garage, and they actually practice for, endless hours of tossing 2 dice across the length of a craps table. But again, I'm not an expert in this field, so I can't elaborate too much, but I have read a little bit on it. And what I know is that through leveraging their arm and just releasing the dice in a certain manner, these guys can they say they can alter the number 7 coming up just so slightly that it actually gives them an edge. Now, again,
I'll tell you
whether that's true or not, I don't know, but
it's funny that you describe that, because I wrote a blog post some time ago that roulette dealers who all day long are shooting a little ball can actually, after a while, kind of figure out about what range that ball is going to drop into. And maybe they can slightly alter the randomness of the game. They don't totally take it away, but I wonder, and I don't know, I've talked to some dealers and they've said that after a while, you kind of get a feel for it. You do something 8 hours every day, day after day, you kind of catch on to, maybe you get a little edge. Maybe there's less randomness to it than we think.
Right. I'll tell you something. That's what's known as the biased wheel. And there, believe it or not as much now because the casinos have caught on to the biased wheel, but 20, 30 years ago for sure. What happened is that there were teams of roulette players that would go from casino to casino, and they would make small minimum bets and watch the wheel and the balls and watch where they would land. And a biased wheel and how a biased wheel comes about is that the casinos in the older days, they didn't change out the roulette wheels frequently enough. They would keep the same roulette wheel spinning and spinning, day in and day out, month after month. And what happens is that when these roulette wheels spin, over and over for months and months, the base of the wheel would wear out. And it would start to wear out and possibly even slightly, just fractionally lean towards one side of the wheel. And therefore, if you had that imbalance in the roulette wheel, the ball would naturally gravitate to that section of the wheel. And that's where these professional roulette wheel guys would come in and exploit a biased wheel. And they used to make hundreds of thousands, some of them millions of dollars over these biased wheels. And the casinos didn't realize it. And they finally, eventually, obviously caught on. And now that's the reason that, unfortunately, the biased wheel doesn't work too much anymore, because casinos are changing out these wheels much more frequently, or they're much more elaborate too, so they don't wear out as much. But that's what I think you were alluding to, is that
that's absolutely fascinating. I'm actually talking about that the dealer, the guy who flicks the ball, can actually, after a while learn how to do it, and they would work in cahoots with the player. And
although, to be honest, I haven't read or seen much about a biased roulette dealer, the way he flicks the ball. But, there is probably some merit in that, because anything that a human being can touch or handle in a casino can ultimately be manipulated.
What's really fascinating about this discussion, and I really appreciate you having this conversation, is that
my pleasure.
It's a game of cat and mouse. The casino makes the rules, and then the people try to, outfox the casino, and then the casino figures something out. So you got the mathematicians come in, work on the cards, and then they change the number of decks. They change the way that the shufflers work. They change the way the discard works. They change the odds. I mean, the casinos are constantly changing things. I've seen over time, some of these casinos don't pay 3-2 on blackjack anymore. I mean, some pay 6-5, some pay even money. I mean, they've changed a lot of things. And how does a regular player, not a professional blackjack player, how does that person take into account the disadvantage that comes with those rule changes?
Yeah, unfortunately, over the years, over the decades, the game of blackjack, as we once knew it, has definitely deteriorated, and that's unfortunate. They're just the casinos, like, they didn't make enough money when they used to pay 3-2. So now they're changing the blackjack payouts to 6-5, or, like you said, even some even money, which is horrendous. Basically, my advice to the public, whoever, all your listeners, is do not sit down and play any blackjack game that doesn't have the original standard rules, which is, and just for an example, 3-2 payout on blackjacks, double downing after splitting. You can split any first two cards. These are the general basic rules that blackjack always had. And to answer your question, the game has been eroding. You just, as the general public, you want to stay away from those games. Stay away from those games. And unfortunately, a lot of the public does play those games, and so the casinos are happy, and that's why they keep offering them, because the public will come. If they put it out there, the public will come. Well, I can't get that message out strong enough that the public needs to stay away from all those terrible rule blackjack games.
This has been just the most remarkable discussion. It's so eye-opening. It is so interesting to see how these casinos work and how players work the system. Is there anything that you want to close with that just kind of winds us down as we kind of get to the end of this time together?
Well, if your listeners would like, I could definitely get into some of my own personal wins and losses over the years, a few little personal stories they might like. So,
all right. Well, I was a little hesitant to ask you about that because it starts kind of bordering on personal information, and we kind of try to keep it a little business. But if you don't mind, if you want to dish it a little bit on what you've actually done and what you've accomplished, and how this game or sport, do you think of it as a game or a sport?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never actually been asked that. Never thought of it. It's at a professional level, it's probably sport.
Okay, well, listen. So so tell us. First of all, how often do you play?
Well, I've winded it down. I've toned it down a little over the last few years. But God, in my heyday, oh boy, I used to play probably at least once, maybe twice a month. And when I say that, that means either a day trip, like to some of the local casinos, without giving too much away, let's say in Southern California, versus a weekend in Vegas, or maybe even a little longer. So 1 to twice a month in my heyday. Now I'm playing. Do
you play at some of the Indian casinos, or only in Vegas?
No. Anywhere they offer a good, solid blackjack game. And like we spoke earlier, that means the good rules and, some fairly high limits, and because you don't want to be restricted. So anywhere there's a good game, I definitely go and attack. And that's definitely Indian casinos. There are a lot of good Indian casinos out there that offer really good blackjack games. You just got to look for it. So
really. And so you go out a couple times. I mean, what do you, what table stakes do you play? I mean, what's your typical?
Great question. I generally play and have been for many years at the black chip level, which is $100 chips. And my bet range is usually between 100 to 500, my bet spread.
So you were talking about spread before, like somebody come in, bet $5 and then go to 500. That's unreasonable. But so
right.
For you, 100 to 500, like 5 to 1, that's kind of a good spread.
Right. Mathematically, if you can get away with a 1 to 8, or even better, a 1 to 10, if you can get away with it, that's where the real money comes in. Now, of course, without going into too much detail, some of the pros and the teams, they'll actually get away with 1 to 100. They'll bet 100, 100, and then the table max is 10. And then all of a sudden the count will get high and they'll put 10,000 in the betting circle. So they'll get away with a 1 to 100 bet spread and even beyond. But for me, it generally, to keep it safe, and I don't want to raise too many eyebrows. I do a 1 to 5 bet spread.
How do those guys get away with 1 to 100? I mean, they must be playing. They're not playing individual. They must be playing team.
No, they're playing. That's exactly what they do. They play in the teams, and that's a whole different category, team play. But basically what they do is they have what's called a spotter, a guy who will be sitting at the table counting down a deck, betting just the minimum, and then through a very subtle bodily motion with his arm, his hand, with whatever, he'll signal in what's known as a BP, a big player, and this player will come in and bet table max and maybe on several hands, and they're working in cahoots together. So they're literally getting away with a 1 to 100 bet spread. But you have to work, with a team, and that takes
that's a whole other ball game. That takes a lot of hours of practice and so on and so forth.
Wow, that's so you play 1 to 5, maybe sometimes 1 to 8. So you're playing $100, $500, give or take, and some of these tables, are these tables usually full, or are they usually not too full?
Yeah, that's one of the little hiccups with professional or advanced card counting, is that when you're playing by yourself, a lot of times the public will come and sit down right next to you, and that's happened before, and it's hard to shoo them away. It's not really the right thing to do, and you can try and reserve a table, but that's hard to do. You don't want to do too much to stand out. So a lot of times, I'll be sitting by myself, and then all of a sudden Joe Public comes and sits down, and before you know it, the table's full, and that's not too good, because I've actually been playing at a table that's full, and the count went astronomically high, went through the roof. I put out a big bet, and everybody around me is getting 20s and blackjacks, and I end up with a 14, a hard 14.
Well, and worse of all is that the amount of action that you do in an hour goes down by 7.
Absolutely. When you're playing heads up, if you're fast and quick, you can get 100, 120, 140. I've known guys that get up to 180, 200 hands an hour.
Well, especially if you're playing multiple hands at one time, that's a whole other deal, right?
Right. Yeah, So if you're at an empty table and the count is just neutral, it's going along, you're playing one hand, then all of a sudden the count shoots up. It's actually mathematically advantageous to not only make your bets vertically higher, but you want to spread your bets horizontally, meaning multiple betting spots as well. So instead of going, on one hand from $100 to 10,000, instead of doing that vertically, you'll spread your bets horizontally and go 3 hands of 3,000, let's say. So there's $9,000. Let's say you're playing
$100 hands. You got 1 or 2, 3 hands going, whatever you're doing. And all of a sudden it count jumps, and you move your bet to 500, and you got 3 stacks of 500 out there. I mean, does the dealer recognize that? Does the pit boss recognize that? Who pays attention?
They all recognize it, and you got it. And that's where the art of a really good professional card counter comes in. You've got to a really good exceptional card counter can actually keep the count, the running count, and the true count, and actually have a light conversation with the dealer simultaneously. That's when you've arrived as a professional card counter. You can actually talk to the dealer and or the pit boss and still keep that number, that running count in your head. Now, and the reason you want to talk to these people is to throw them off from concentrating on what you're actually doing at the table. So in other words, if you're talking to the dealer and the dealer is talking back to you, the dealer hopefully isn't noticing as much that you're spreading your bets from 1 bet of 100 to 3 bets of 500. I mean, they're going to notice, but if you're talking to them, that might diffuse the situation well, as opposed to just keeping your mouth shut and just sitting there and playing $100 $100, and then all of a sudden going to 3 hands of 500 or 1,000. When you're not talking to the dealer, that stands out like a sore thumb to the dealer.
It might not be so much that you throw them off their track, but they kind of look at you and go, if this guy can talk and fool around and laugh and joke, there's no chance he can do all that other stuff too.
Exactly. And that's what separates the good from the great counters. That right there.
Yeah. Have you ever met any of these great guys? Like some of the really heroic guys?
I have. These guys, the top guys, they wrote the books, and we mentioned Edward Thorpe earlier. One of the other giants in the industry that's been around for, 40, 50 years is a gentleman by the name of Stanford Wong.
Oh yeah.
Now that's an alias. That's not his real name. But he's one of the godfathers of blackjack and card counting and the whole deal. And another brilliant mathematician who took to blackjack and revolutionized the game in the late 60s, early 70s. Anyhow, bottom line is I met him at a blackjack tournament down at the Barona Casino in San Diego many years ago. And what a great guy. And we were just talking and just, oh my God, a lot of fun, very intelligent. You can tell, just super high IQ, almost to the point of intimidation, but yeah, I met him and I met a few other guys along the way. So, but he's one that stands out, Stanford Wong.
Well, those guys are they're remarkable people, and they've gone on to do great work in different things. So tell us. So you ever had a giant win?
Yeah. All right. I'm sure your listeners are waiting with bated breath for some numbers like this. But so over 30 years, again, now I'm not what you would call a super high roller. I try and stay under the radar myself. So, but betting on the 1 to 500 level, 100 to 500 level, for example, biggest weekend win I've ever had. I was up. I once walked out for the weekend with $17,000 in pure profit.
Wow! From
playing just blackjack. Yeah, 17 grand. That particular weekend, I was actually up 20,000, just over 20,000 at one point. Unfortunately, I hate myself for this. I didn't walk out and leave the town, drive home or fly home with 20,000, and I should have, because it's such a nice round number. It's got a nice ring to it, 20 grand. And I didn't think about it at the time. Yeah, I didn't think about it at the time, but actually, I ended up literally, driving home with 17,000 in my pocket. Now that was the most I've ever made just card counting, playing open blackjack in a casino. I've had some fortunate other trips where, for example, if you'll allow me, I played blackjack tournaments. I once won a blackjack tournament at the Treasure Island Hotel on the Vegas Strip, and that tournament netted me in cash 20,000. But in addition to the 20,000 I made in the tournament, I won an extra 6,000 playing just regular open blackjack in the casinos. So I actually drove home that weekend with 26,000.
God, that's not bad for a weekend, and you play.
Yeah.
Now what about this? These casinos, they're giving out perks and comps and free dinners, and they have these casino clubs. You do any of that stuff?
I actually do. I did it for many years. And for many years, I didn't use an alias, a fake ID, fake name. I used my real name, but unfortunately that kind of caught up to me. And I got into, using some aliases, fake IDs. And technically, there are people in the witness protection program all over this country and all over the world that, have to use aliases, fake IDs. So it's technically not illegal to use a fake ID in a situation like a casino or you walk into a movie theater or whatnot. Now, if you want to go into a bank and get a loan, yeah, that's where it's illegal. But to use a fake ID in a casino, it's technically, I looked this up, it's not illegal. So you can go into a casino with a fake ID. And I started doing that. But before I did that, when I was using my real name, of course, I was getting all the perks. And to be honest, I'm married. My wife and I haven't paid for a room in Vegas in probably 30 years. So that's part of the perks, and free meals and even world-class entertainment. We've seen Paul McCartney, Madonna, U2. We've really just wining, dining, and world-class entertainment. A lot of it was free, and that's one of the big perks about card counting and playing a lot of blackjack. So that was fantastic.
Well, listen, let me just tell the listeners, you're not an attorney, right?
I am not an attorney.
So don't take his advice, his legal advice about making any IDs.
Right.
I don't know if it's good or bad or whatever. It's listen, professional card players have to do what they have to do, but that doesn't mean we have to do it. So
right, yeah.
Have you ever taken a big loss?
Yes, I have. Biggest personal loss for a weekend of play, unfortunately, was 20,000.
Wow. So that's
really
about,
hurt.
that's about the same as you're up.
Yeah, surprisingly. Now, just to branch out a little bit, and I'm sure your listeners might enjoy this little story. As a blackjack card counter, and literally, grinding out, year after year after year, a lot of us will tend to get into some other alternative forms of gambling, mainly, of course, where we can also have an advantage, like sports betting or poker or whatnot. Where you can work on an advantage. Every now and then, though, and this is what's known as camouflage. We like to throw off the casinos by playing, a little bit of some non-beatable games, just because it's what's known as camouflage. We like to throw the casinos off and let them think that we are some just, run-of-the-mill gamblers. Anyhow, the point of my story is I played a little bit of what's known as Pai Gow poker. Now, some of your listeners may or may not know about this game, but it's basically just 7-card stud poker. And you divide the 7 cards into 2 cards. And in a nutshell, you need to beat the dealer on both cards. Anyhow, a lot of these casinos have what's called a progressive Pai Gow. And I used to play a little of this just to throw off the casinos a little bit if they were watching me. And this way they see me playing this non-beatable game. Anyhow, long story short, I was playing Pai Gow poker in a India casino down in San Diego, a very respectable casino down there. And it was about 3:30 in the morning, and I was with a couple of buddies. And they have this progressive bet where you pay $1 and you place it into the betting circle, $1. And if you happen to get a 7-card straight flush, you can win the maximum jackpot. And it turns out the maximum jackpot at this point was $90,000. And believe it or not, you're hearing it straight from me, and I swear on my life, I ended up getting a 7-card straight flush, which I looked up is approximately 800,000 to 1 odds. And I ended up winning $90,000 that particular weekend.
That's amazing.
So,
that is,
it's a great story, but it's a true story. I swear.
And that's taxable money, isn't it?
Now that one, unfortunately, was taxable. They took 20% out. So, about 18 grand. So, but I drove home that weekend with just over 70 grand.
And did they give you that money in stacks of $100 bills, or did they write you?
No. They actually they ask you how you want it, but I didn't want to carry out 70,000 in cash. So what I did is I actually took a check for $55,000, and I took the rest, which was about 16 grand, in cash. Yeah. So that was technically that's the most money I've ever won in a casino was $90,000.
Wow.
Okay, but again, blackjack, 26,000 with a tournament, 20,000 on my own. Biggest loss, 20,000. But it just, it was. And again,
so tell me something. Are you the kind of person that lives for the rush? I mean, it seems to me like it's got to feel like being on a roller coaster, up, down, up, down.
It is, and there is a rush, but it's just, in the long run, it's just, if you're successful. After a while, it's not even about the money. It's just going in and being able to beat these casinos, these mighty behemoths, with hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions of dollars behind them, and all that security and the personnel and this and that. And you go in, like we spoke earlier, you're the little mouse, and they're the cat, and they're trying to catch you. But you know what? Sometimes the mouse, skirmishes in, grabs a piece of the cheese, and gets out before they ever spring the trap. And that right there is the greatest feeling of all.
Well, you know what? And that's what the inside track's all about, man. You absolutely live on the inside track.
Thank you, Joel.
All right. Hey, listen, Mike, thanks very much for sharing. This was amazing. And I'll look forward to maybe one of these days I'll watch you play some cards.
I'd love it. Absolutely.
All right, man. Listen, thanks very much. Really appreciate you being on the show.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Take care.
Okay.
You've been listening to Profit from the Inside with Joe Block. Strategies to give your business the inside track. For more insights and to learn more, visit joelblock.com.
How about a shout out and a giant thanks to my podcast producer, David Wolf, and his team at Podcast and Radio Networks. Profit from the Inside simply wouldn't be what it is without David and his team. For more information or to learn how you can launch and produce your own podcast, reach out to podcastandradio.com.